ingredients of personhood, populated by things that themselves point to, reflect and justify this liberal democratic political vision. In other words, it's no surprise to see this political angle to personhood defined narrowly around notions of human cognition and an ability to manage one's affairs. Personally, I've never been able to manage my affairs. The whole point of our political and legal order is to create this uncoerced space for the self, for the masterless man, to assume plenary power over their own destinies. The legal order is there to protect this space, to allow individuals to create their own mini legal universes in free association with others. This can only be done if one is self-possessed and self-driven, as being rational and capable of plotting one's course, which implies weighing options and risks and deciding accordingly. We can question essentialism as much as we like, the tendency to separate out the essential criteria of personhood, but political imperatives point to some form of essentialism which largely have pivoted around cognition and rationality. I digress for a moment. Maybe an added impulse toward selecting cognition as the essential criteria of personhood is the fact that we will be left with responsibility to tidy up if persons without the requisite intellectual capacity will be given additional breathing space to take charge of their own lives and make mistakes. Well, there's a very interesting paradox here. There are plenty of what I would call walking wrecks out there, and we all know some, who do create plenty of problems to be tidied up by others, which we don't seem to mind so much. I've often wondered why this freedom is tolerated for the many and not for the few. It is a puzzle. Well, this is the myth system of personhood, pivoting on cognition, driven, I would say, largely by political considerations. I don't see these political considerations are inherently bad. Far from it. Try living in the old Soviet system. My point is that when the tail wags the dog, when one's conception of personhood is exclusively or largely based on cognition in order to set up a political theory, then a lot of significance seems screened from view. What's screened out? And I think what is screened out is incredibly important for all of us as citizens, and not just for those with intellectual disabilities. So what's screened out? I think first of all, we, the people on the street, really do not think that there is some essence of personhood. I don't think people think like that. Most people's conception of personhood runs a lot deeper and probably defies essentialism. There is something about the dignity of humans that is left out of the picture by this excessive fixation on cognition. Something that ordinary people are in fact generally willing to concede, I believe. We don't exclude others simply because they're different. Our culture's fixation on cognition actually runs very deep, though. Ponder this. I was recently reading Eva Feder-Kittay's recent book on ethics and intellectual disability, which is truly an amazing book. And one is struck by the disability, and I use the word advisedly, the disability of political philosophers to accommodate persons with intellectual disabilities within a theory of justice. When I say a theory of justice, I mean the broad Rawlsian social contract theory of justice. God bless these willy jumper guys, and especially their commitment to distributive justice. Most of them actually accept that the theory of justice cannot embrace, i.e. does not cover, persons with whose cognitive disability does not allow them to participate in negotiating the social contract. Or if it does, it only does so by way of an exception, which in itself cannot be explained from within the theory of justice. Now forgive me, but this sounds like the cowboy arguments I used to have with my brother. The easy point here is that a theory of justice that does not cover all humans can hardly count as a theory of justice at all. The deeper point is that the syllogism needed to produce the liberal conception of justice forces one to define the self rationally, forces one toward essentialism, an essentialism that prizes cognition in the masterless man. So, this reductionist and essentialist picture plays to the notion of the masterless man, wandering purposively through life. Although we all aspire to be masterless men and women, we all acknowledge that our sense of self is actually a relational concept. Don't trust me? Look at the recent work of neuroscientist Antonio Damasio. He shows quite convincingly the mind does not exist in some atomistic desert beloved of Thomas Hobbes. It's an intensely social artifact, melding as it individuates. Maybe another story brings this point home. I once did a very, very naughty thing as a young boy playing cowboys with my younger brothers. I pointed a loaded potato gun, which was loaded with tiny pebbles, at my brother at point-blank range. Wham! I got him first time. No need to reload. I felt like Attila the Hun at the gates of Constantinople. Final victory was in sight. The problem of sibling rivalry was about to be solved. He screams, outruns my mother. There was no use denying I pulled the trigger. What to do? Well, I knew how devout my mother was, so I quickly played the Catholic card. When confronted, I didn't deny it. I just passed on responsibility by saying, the devil tempted me. This is a true story. I didn't suffer from Irish Catholic guilt. I knew the devil was the guilty party. That bought me about 30 minutes peace while my mother struggled with the way to respond. Aha, I knew I had her, hoisted by her own petard. As a 9-year-old, I had successfully internalized her worldview, whilst never actually believing it myself, and negotiated a temporary reprieve by playing to her emotional commitments and knocking her off balance. What amazingly social animals we are. By the way, that's when I had first inkling to become a lawyer. So the self in self-determination, or the auto in autonomy, turns out to be a hologram for the community, one in which social capital is reflected just as the self individuates itself free. Now, hover for a moment. It is the social capital of our lives, especially intimate social capital, in the form of parents, family, friends, and community that help define who we are. I'm Gerard Quinn, the person, but I present as a self having been through a conservative Catholic upbringing, most of which I rebelled totally against. This is the dialectic, the stuff of our beings. We present ourselves differently in different contexts. However, some more. This dense social capital at once poses both a threat and an opportunity. None of us can safely cabin the threat element away from the opportunity element. Of course, this places a question mark over identity. How can I be sure that I voted for Party X because it's the right thing to do, or because I internalized my parents' aversion to Party Y? What's my point? Well, we tend to agonize over the hidden dangers of supported decision-making, the ease with which the other is not just invested in, but can absorb the self. Can we draw lines to ensure that supports do not become substitutes? Well, my point is that this affects all of us, and not just those of us for whom a formalized system of support is put in place. Is there something about persons with intellectual disabilities that makes them maybe more prone to this capture? Maybe the threat exists in a stronger form in the context of intellectual disability, but it is actually a threat we all navigate daily in our own lives. Depending on the relationship in question, we are all deeply impressionable beings. Stay hovering for a moment. If deprived of this social capital, of the raw material out of which we emerge individuated, and into which we continually affirm ourselves as we alter ourselves, what chance do we have of constituting a sense of self if shorn of all of this social capital? Now, I grew up a few doors away from a boy with Down syndrome. His father was a policeman, a very jolly policeman. This boy was always in our games and ran around with us. We were an adventurous lot, no health and safety for us. He lived among us and not apart from us, and I'm sure this helped him to move on in life as